This is a reteach for the function, slope, and direct variation test. So remember to do your test corrections. You need to write down the answer that you got, and then the answer it should have been, and then you need to show your work, rework the problems, and explain what you did wrong. Or like for the first 5 here, or maybe even the first section on functions, you just need to explain what you did wrong because there's not really any calculation work to do. Okay, so we have to, through 1 through 5, we have to decide whether or not these are functions. So remember, a function is when each x has only one y value. So in this first one with these ordered pairs, I'm going to go and highlight the x's so I can look at just those for now. So I have -2, 0, 2, and 4. Those are all different. So that's definitely a function. So I'm going to say function, and then half your points were explaining. So because each x has one y, so one y. Okay, number 2, this mapping, I'm going to look at the arrows. I see that 9 has 2 arrows, 4 has 2 arrows, and 1 has 2 arrows. So that means that I have the points, let's see, I'll write over here. 9 goes to -3, and 9 goes to 3. That can't happen. 1x can't have 2 different y's. That's not a function. So I get some space over here. This is not a function because I can say 1x has 2 y's. You can write that down. Because 9 maps to, how about we say that, both -3 and 3. Okay, let's go look at number 3. Okay, this one, the graph, we talk about the vertical line test. If you look at that graph, at no point on that graph is there an absolute vertical line. Now, because of the scale and it's little, if you try to draw lines through that, it's going to look like it goes through 2 points at once because of how narrow it is. But it really doesn't. Each x has its own y, even though they might be separated by like 0.001. So this is yes. You can say each x has one y, or you could say passes the vertical line test. Graphs that aren't functions are going to either have an absolutely vertical part in them like that, or they're going to do something like this. Okay, they're going to curve back on themselves. All right, number 4, again, we have a table with x values, so I'm going to look at my x's. These are all different, so it's definitely a function. It's okay if all the x's map to the same y value, because if I look at them individually, -2 only goes to 5, -1 only goes to 5, 0 only goes to 5, so that makes it a function. So yes, because each x goes to 1y. Okay, and then number 5, we did talk about this in class. If I'm finding the volume of a sphere and it gives me the formula, all this formula is saying, maybe that was what confused some people is, this is your formula. Okay, so I have 2 variables, v and r, one's the input, one's the output. Well, since v equals 4/3 pi r to the 3rd power, that makes r the input and v the output. So I can't put an input of a radius in, say, 3 and get 2 different answers out. Because if I put 3 in, it's going to be whatever, 3 cubed is times 4/3 times pi. That's going to give me one answer each time, not a different answer each time. So this is yes. Right over here. Oops. There we go. Yes. Because each x, or in this case r, will give one y, in this case volume. You're not going to, we talked about in class, you're not going to have two spheres with the same radius give you two different volumes. They're going to be the same volume, so that's a yes. Any equation like that, equation for area of a triangle, the equation for surface area of a prism, any of those, the equation for force in science, with science equations, those are all functions. Okay, so which of the following statements are correct descriptions of this graph over here? So I'm going to go through each case and, decide whether it's true or false. F of x is a discrete function. Well, no, it's connected. Remember, discrete functions are the ones that are just data points. So, nope, it's not that one. So it can't be 1. So that means A is out. The range of f of x is y is less than or equal to 16. So I'm going to my y, and I'm going right here. Let me use this. Right here, that is 16, and it's everything below, so that one's true. Okay, so that one's true, so it cannot be letter C. Okay, f of x equals 12 when x equals 4. So I'm going over here where x equals 4, which is right here. Let me see if I can. Right here, that's 4. I go up to the line. When I go over here, that's 12. So that one's true. So 2 and 3. And I just have to see if 4 is included. The domain of f of x is -8. X is less than or equal to -8. X is greater than or equal to -8, less than or equal to 8. So if I look at my graph, I do see that it goes through the x-axis at 8 and -8, but it has arrows. Those arrows mean the domain is all real numbers. So that's not true. So that kicks out D, and the right answer is B. Okay, what is the domain of the graph? So I need the domain. So I remember that's my x values. So that means B's out, D's out, because those say Y in the middle. So I need X. All right, now I need to go to my X axis and look at the X, the lowest X value and the highest X value. So it looks like I'm going between -1 and 3. Those circles are closed, so I know that my domain is -1, less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 3, which is A. Okay, so now we're on to the slope section. Okay, so determine whether each rate of change is constant. If it is, find the rate of change and explain what it means. So we're going to attempt to find the slope in each of these, okay? So I have to do change in y over change in x. That's what the rate of change is. And then I need to find out what it is, what it means. So this is +2, this is +2. Over here I have +1. So it looks like every time x increases by 1, y increases by 2. It keeps happening. It's a constant rate of change. So it's 2 over 1, which equals 2. What does that mean? This hockey team scores 2 goals per game. So when you talk about what it means, you really should use your unit rate. It represents the unit rate, so to speak. Okay, over here, miles per gallon. Let's see. This is plus 56. This is plus 56. And this is plus 56. So we gotta go check out the X column before we do say yes. This is plus 2, plus 2, plus 2. So it looks like every time X increases by 2, Y is increasing by 56. So change in Y over change in X, that simplifies to 28. And that means, let's move over a little bit, that means we are getting 28 miles per gallon, which is pretty good. Okay, alrighty, moving, oops, that one over, move this back over. There we go. The slope of each line. Well, we're going to do rise over run. The first thing I'm going to note, though, is that number 8 here, this first graph, it's a positive slope. So I'm going to kind of write that down. Let me use a different color so it doesn't all run together. I see it's going up, puff, puff, positive. So I know I'm going to get a positive slope. Okay, so I'm going to do rise over run. So I need to pick 2 points. So I'm going to pick this point here and this point here. Okay, and so I'm going to count up and over. Or I'm going to pull these points off the graph. I'm using 0.01 and 0.25. All right, so I'm going up. I see my graph is going by 1, so I can just count 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to the right 2, which is plus 2. Or you're coming over here and you're saying, well, the difference here is 4. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. I want it to be positive if I can. So that is plus 4. That is plus 2. So either way you want to do it, you could use the slope formula that we're going to use in the 10 and 11 if you wanted to. All right, so anyway, rise over run. Change in Y over change in X. 4 over 2. That gives me 2. It's positive, so that seems reasonable. Okay, so over here, this next one, I see it's negative. Remember, nice, negative, going down. So I know my slope's going to be negative. So if I pick 2 points, I see that like maybe here, and I'm going to go like here only because it's very small. So I'm going up 2, plus 2, and to the left 2, that's negative 2. Or you could pull your points off your graph and look at them kind of like in a table. I have 3, 1, and I have 1, 3. So change in Y is plus 2, change in X is minus 2. So 2 over negative 2 gives me negative 1. Okay, now the 2 points. I need to use my slope formula, which was on your reference chart. Well, you could make these into a little table if you wanted to. You could say 1, 0, negative 4, 2. That's plus 2. Move this a little bit. To get from 1 to negative 4, you subtract 5. Change in Y over change in X. Or you could use your formula. You can put this whole thing into your calculator as well. So if you label x1, y1, it might make it easier. x2, y2. Oops. That's 2. So then I would have, let me do this one in a different color so it doesn't get run into this. 2 minus 0 over negative 4 minus 1. You can put the whole thing into your calculator. Do control divide. It'll give you a fraction template. Put 2 minus 0 in the numerator, negative 4 minus 1 in the denominator, and it will tell you negative 2. Okay, number 11. Again, you could put your points, like write them sort of like in a table. To get from 6 to negative 7, I'm going to subtract 13. 2 minus 2, that's a change of 0. So it's negative 13 over 0. Or, using your slope formula, x1, y1, x2, y2. When I do this, I label them, but I really just say to myself, I'm going to subtract the y's, and then I'm going to subtract the x's in the same order, starting with the same point. And again, you can put that whole thing in your calculator. And actually, if you put this in your calculator, you're more likely to get the answer right, because a lot of y'all either left it like this or told me that was equal to 0. You can't leave it like this. No, nobody writes like this. No. You have to tell me what that means. 13 divided by 0, or anything divided by 0, doesn't make any sense. It's undefined. You can't have 0 in a denominator. So remember, what a fraction ultimately means is part out of the whole. How could I have 13 parts of nothing? That doesn't make any sense. So this is undefined. And in order to get your points to count it right, you have to tell me that. You can't just leave it as negative 13 over 0. Now, if you do this in the calculator will tell you undefined. So if you're not sure, if you're like, is that 0? Is that undefined? I don't remember. Put it in the calculator. Or what you also could have done is made a little graph and do 2, 6 to negative 7. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's a straight line. Remember, slope guy, he fell off the cliff and said undefined. So either way. Okay, I have points, 2 points, and I have a slope of a line, but I need to know the x-coordinate. So I'm going to use my slope formula definitely for this. So m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, and I'm just going to fill in what I know. I know my slope is negative 1. So negative 1 equals 6 minus 5 over negative 3 minus x. Okay, now you guys, lots of you did, you know that 6 minus 5, I guess I'll do it that way because that's how most of you all thought about this. So 6 minus 5 equals 1. You need this to equal negative 1. So a lot of you said, well, then I know that this has to be negative 1. So negative 3 minus x has to equal negative 1. So if you solve that little one-step equation, I know it has a lot of negative signs here, so let's see what we can do. Add 3 at each side. So negative x equals negative 1 plus 3 is 2. Divide by negative 1, because there's a 1 here, right? So x equals negative 2. There you go. If you get something that's not obvious what that needs to be, then you need to come here, and I would have said, well, this is an integer, to make it a fraction, I put over 1, and you could cross multiply. And then you have this equation basically to solve right here. Okay, so this x equals negative 2. Okay, explain why the slope of a horizontal line is always 0. So I got a lot of interesting answers here. A lot of those answers just explain to me what a horizontal line is. In order to get points, you had to say, because in a horizontal line, there is no change in y. Something along those lines. A lot of people say because it doesn't increase or decrease. What doesn't? You know, the x or the y. So it's important you know that it's the change in y. So you can say there's no change in y, Therefore, 0 is in the numerator, 0 divided by anything equals 0, something along those lines. But this was key. I needed to see something about the change in y, and that's what slope is. All right, direct variation. Tell whether y varies directly with x. So I first have tell whether it does. So I first have to answer yes or no. Yes or no. If it's yes, I need to find k. So here's where, like I was saying in class, a lot of y'all did change in y over change in x. Okay, and that's going to be constant because it's linear. But so will a non-direct variation that's linear have a constant rate of change. So what you need to remember is that y equals kx. So when we divide y by x, if that's constant, this is going to be a direct variation. So 9 divided by -6 equals, if you do that on your calculator, you get -1.5. And a lot of people did. Hardly anybody just told me -3/2. Negative probably because of the one right there. Divided by 1 is -1.5. And -12 divided by 8 is -1.5. So, yes. And then it asked, write an equation, not just what k is, write an equation. But in order to write the equation, I needed to know k. So y equals -1.5x. That is the complete answer. Okay, and then 15 and 16 says, determine whether each represents a direct variation. So again, I need to say yes or no. If it does, I have to find k. Before I can do that, you have to solve for y. Before you can decide, solve for y. Now, some of you decide because you know, well, I know it's not because there's a constant added. That's great, but if you don't solve for y first, you're going to get the wrong k. So to solve this for y, I have to get rid of the coefficient, so I'm dividing by -x. So y equals -1/4 x. That's a yes, it's y equals kx. Yes, and k is -1/4 or -0.25. Over here, when I solve for y, I have to get y by itself, so I need to get rid of the -12. So I'm adding 12 to both sides, which is going to take this over here, add 12. So I'm going to get y equals 12x plus 12. That's a no, because I have a constant added. So there's no k. So I'm done with that one. Okay, and these two. Okay, so I need to write a direct variation that relates x and y. So we already know these are direct variations. Then find the value of y when x equals 8. Not the value of k when y is 10 and x is 8, which is what a lot of people did. Okay, so first thing I need to do is y equals kx. So just using that, y is 10 here. K is, I don't know, it's what I have to find out. So y is k times x. How do I undo multiplication with division? So 10 divided by 2, I get k equals 5. Okay, so that means my equation is y equals, I was going to write k, nope, 5x. Here we go. 5x. Okay, that's right, a direct variation equation. Now I need to find this. So y equals 5x is 8. So that means that y equals 40. And some of you solve this like with a proportion first, and that's fine. If you were confused about how to write the direct variation, then you could have at least got that answer right if you used proportional reasoning. Okay, so the answers I needed were this counts as an answer, and that counts as an answer. Okay, number 18, same thing. He's black. You'll see it better. This one's kind of dark. Y equals kx. So y is 6, k is what I'm looking for, x is 18. Again, divide. So k equals 6/18, which simplifies to 1/3. So y equals 1/3 x is my first answer. That's my equation. And you want your equation because it does make it a little bit easier to do when x equals 8. So y equals 1/3 times 8. So y equals 8/3. Okay, or you could have converted that to 2 2/3. Some people told me 2.6 repeating. Some people rounded it. I vote we just leave it 8/3 and call it good. Okay, so if you have questions about any of this, make sure you see me. Come in for tutoring next week. The retest dates will be in the calendar for next week. Okay, so that should be out Friday afternoon. Definitely by Sunday evening that will be in the classroom. So check that. Come do your retest and see me if you have any questions about how I did any of these problems.